for 5:30.
Oh, it was.
We're right on the dot.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's 15 seconds.
Call to order the meeting of the Austin City Planning Commission. The first thing we need to do is approve the minutes from last month.
So moved.
Second.
That was Mino and Bremner. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes approved as submitted. So our first order of business is the open public hearing to consider a conditional use permit. Holly, you want to walk us through it?
Yes.
Since we don't have any public here, I'll just stay where I am, and I won't necessarily put it on the screen unless somebody wants me to do that.
Make yourself comfortable.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I appreciate it. I know you have a lot on your plates. This first item is for St. Augustine's Catholic Church, 405 4th Street Northwest, Austin, Minnesota. The property is located actually at 405 5th Street Northwest, the specific lot that is the subject of this conditional use permit. The church is asking to be allowed to pave a lot that they acquired this year and to add some additional parking to their church property, which includes the church and a school, elementary school. The property across the street also has a parking lot existing, and then this lot, they would like to add parking and a small garage, 24 by 24, I believe, at the back of the lot. This is kind of an unusual situation because this church has been here since the 1800s, and then the school was added in the probably mid-1900s, or well, I think it's been reconfigured over the years, but there's been some kind of school there for probably 100 years as well. So that leaves us with a property that has predated our zoning ordinances by some time. However, within our ordinance, we do allow churches as a conditional use in residential zones. So this use would be allowed with conditions. So moving forward, as the church adds property and develops property around them as they're able to, or as they're able to acquire property, they are subject to the conditional use process. Most of you have been through this procedure before. I'll just go through the current use in that area is R1. It's an R1 district. The church and school are in an R2 residential district. The non-conforming use that the church currently has can continue to exist as a non-conforming use. Just because we're doing the conditional use process doesn't mean that everything now has to be in conformity. So we're focusing on this property as one for zoning purposes of this one lot, which is kind of maybe a little unusual from what we normally do. The requirements for the conditional use permit require that you consider the effect of the proposed use upon the health, safety, and general welfare of the occupants of the surrounding land, including land values as well as the preservation of natural features. The Planning Commission shall make the following findings where applicable. I got my pages mixed up here. That the use will not create an excessive burden on existing parks, schools, streets, and other public facilities and utilities which serve or are proposed to serve the area. And I've made some notes in here just for your benefit and to maybe develop some conversation about some of these things. You certainly don't have to agree with me. It's just my observations on this particular project and having talked to the petitioner about the project. There may be information that you notice that hasn't been added or you have questions about. This is compared to the property in general and the area in general, this would be a minor addition to the church facilities. It doesn't additionally burden any infrastructure in the neighborhood as far as like water, electricity, utilities. The property was purchased by the church. It had an existing hazardous building on it, had been an eyesore to the neighbors for many years. So they were overall happy that property was purchased and that the building was removed. That would lead me to just indicate that we sent out 30 notices to the neighbors about the conditional use permit petition. We haven't received any responses, negative or positive. We haven't received any questions about the project. The current ordinance requires, and this goes back to the non-conforming use, the current ordinance requires 172 off-street parking stalls for the church and school. They currently have approximately 65 stalls, so this project would add some parking stalls, which would help bring the current facilities into conformity, which is one of the things that we always want to try to do with a non-conforming structure. The second part B, one of the other considerations that you need to analyze is that the use will be sufficiently compatible or separated by distances or screening from adjacent agricultural or residentially zoned or used land to protect the value of the land and not deter any development of vacant land. Right now, screening exists between the current parking and grinders and the residential property to the east. There's about 45 feet on the west property boundary, which is the rear residential property. There's a little fence there that's kind of overgrown with some weeds and trees. I don't know if anybody got a chance to go out to look at it, but there's also about a 45-foot section on the west end of the south property boundary behind grinders that would be also is not screened at this point. There would be screening required, and I understand that the church would be agreeable to doing that. And again, they did screen their current parking south of the lot that we're currently discussing. C, the use in the opinion of the Planning Commission is reasonably related to the overall needs of the city and to the existing land use. The school and church provide worship and educational opportunities and alternatives for the community. The church has existed at its location since approximately 1857, and the school was founded in 1871 with various additions in the past 150 years. So it's been in that area of the community for some time, and the community has obviously grown up around it, so it's not something that's new to that area or something that that would cause a great deal of alarm, as far as I know. And again, like I said, I haven't gotten any comments at this point. The structure and site shall have an appearance that will not have an adverse effect upon adjacent properties. We can talk about this more in depth, but the new structure will be required to blend in with the neighborhood and be similar to existing structures. The Part E, the use is consistent with the purpose of the zoning chapter and the purposes of zoning district in which the applicant intends to locate the proposed use. The use is allowed in that area, again, with conditions. The use will not cause traffic hazard or congestion. We don't expect that this use of this land as a parking lot with a little storage area would increase any traffic, cause any traffic increase. The area is already used for parking, and the garages will be solely used for storage and maintenance with regard to St. Augustine's and the school. The existing businesses nearby will not be adversely affected because of curtailment of customer trade brought about by intrusion of noise, glare, or general unsightliness. Again, the church will be required to screen the area, keep it maintained and in good condition. that the use will not result in unnecessary destruction of natural features. In this case, that's not applicable. I mean, there was already a structure on that property that was in the condition that we consider hazardous from a city standpoint. That building was removed and the area now is a vacant lot. Subdivision 5, other considerations that you should take into consideration should be based on but not limited to the following factors: relationship to the community plans, geographical area involved, whether the use will depreciate the area in which it is proposed, the character of the surrounding area, the demonstrated need for use, and maybe Father Steffes can go into this more, but they have looked at doing some work on their current site with the church to enlarge a playground area or create more playground area for the children at the school, and they'd like to remove a place where that they currently use for maintenance and for some storage. You should also consider any odors, dust, flies, vermin, smoke, gas, noise, or vibration. Doesn't appear to be a concern in this case. Whether the use would inherently lead to or encourage disturbing influences in the neighborhood. Whether the stored equipment or materials would be screened, and whether there would be continuous operation within the visible range of the surrounding residences. Again, I can't say for certain, but parking hours I would imagine would normally be during mass and school hours. Vehicles will face away from the residence, I believe was the plan, but I'm not entirely certain about that. Equipment and materials would be stored in the garage. And then I just included some information just for your purposes, just to as educational material about non-conforming lots, land uses, and structures, just to give you a little more information about the current status of the school and church and parking lot that they currently own. Some of the recommendations that I would request if you determine that this is a project that should be granted or a conditional use permit that should be granted would be that the added parking would be designed in a safe and effective manner and would minimize any impact on the surrounding area, specifically the adjacent residents. That any additional development of the parking area should be reviewed by planning and engineering. If necessary, parking areas shall be paved in accordance with city requirements. That screening and landscaping shall be provided to minimize the impact on neighboring residences and businesses. That the proposed garage shall be subject to building code requirements to have an exterior finish that blends in with the surrounding neighborhood. That no additional accessory structures may be added to the subject lot. Any lighting be motion activated and face away from the neighboring properties. That no signs except as required to designate the parking area. No outside storage of materials or equipment, and that the two parking lots with the proposed maintenance garage would be combined under one parcel identification number to meet the frontage and minimum lot size requirements. And then I just have a list of the analysis of all the zoning for that area, which is met, again, if the two lots are combined under one PIN. Do you have any questions?
The only question I had, I appreciate all of the information you gave us. This is probably one of the best I've seen for us to review. But it just had to do with landscaping. Right now it looks like all they did was just asphalt the existing parking lot without any really regard for landscaping around the property. And I think that looks rather barren. And I would hope that we could have some kind of effect on that particular existing parking. I mean, isn't there a requirement for landscaping?
There is not in, well, it's whatever you want it to be in a conditional use, essentially. The residential area, this is kind of a unique situation because typically in a residential area you would have a house with a yard. Yeah. So this is in addition to a church, which is a needed parking area. So a parking area typically doesn't have a lot of landscaping around it, but if you wanted something as part of the screening to soften maybe some of the hardscaping I think that would be reasonable.
So when they
I'm not
did
sure
the
what you have in
original,
mind.
when they did the original parking lot, that came through here and we didn't require any landscaping at that time?
I'm guessing the original parking lot, it's probably been repaved a few times, but I'm guessing it probably predated. I mean, I think that area probably grew a little before our ordinances and probably grew with the use of cars and people coming in, and maybe they didn't account for, the number of vehicles now that people use, and so and maybe there wasn't as much, I am speculating, but there might not have been as much area around the church that was available for parking, or maybe the ordinance just didn't require it at the time. I'm not really sure.
It just seems odd that we allow somebody just to pave over an entire lot without any requirements for landscaping.
Like I said, you could ask for something like that. I mean, it's certainly an option. I guess we could, if you wanted to ask Father Steffes, if he had any ideas or plans. I don't know for sure what kind of landscaping. I had imagined maybe something around the garage area, coming into the parking, but I don't know for certain what the plans were.
I would assume the garage is going to clear back in the very back, so that's not as critical as something around the front area, just to soften it a little bit.
Right.
If you were building a new parking lot in a commercial area, what would the percentage of green space be?
If it was a commercial area versus, it depends on the commercial area. In our downtown districts, we actually don't require any green space. Or in our B2 commercial, we require 20% green space. In our industrial areas, we require kind of they call it a green belt in our ordinance, but I mean, technically, I would say it's just a green area around an industrial project or industrial area. So there's some variation. Of course, again, in residential, it's quite green. You're required to have big yards and, or at least minimum yards.
I can see a tremendous challenge of doing much landscaping in this area just because of the nature of being a parking lot. And people's cars hang over the landscaping and everything else. So, and you don't want to put in stops because then it just messes up the snow removal.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that's a good thing in Austin is we do have the boulevard where they typically plant some trees, which give you some shade and a little bit of greenery as you're traveling down the street. But yes, a parking lot is very challenging. I know I've talked to the people at Mayo when they were putting in islands, and I think they just gave up on, unless you have some specific, they have some really new groundbreaking structures that will help keep things alive in those, but it's just parking lot is a very challenging environment to have green space.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking in terms of requiring a strip all the way around the lot or anything like that,
Sure.
but just adding, might be just.
Maybe some shrubs around the building, small.
Maybe just as either side of the entrance to the parking, there could be some space big enough for a tree or something, or a couple of trees or something, just so that it breaks it up a little. Right now, as you drive by, it just looks like a sea of asphalt there.
Mm-hmm.
Which is an improvement from the house that was there, so thank you for tearing that down. I have a question about ingress and egress. Where will the traffic for parking be going in and out?
I think I'll let Father Steffes take that one. To me, it looks like if they continue to use the current drive or drives, they could use the current drive. That wouldn't be an issue. They had the cars parked facing away from the residence. That would be workable. I think there's already people parking in there in that direction. But I'll let Father Steffes go ahead and comment on that.
Thank you. The corner lot is already parking lot.
Sorry to interrupt you,
That's right.
could you state your name and address for the record?
Absolutely. Father Jim Steffes, 405 4th Street, Northwest.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Presently, the corner lot is also a lot that is parking lot. It's the adjacent lot. The egress is are both on Fifth Street of this new lot and the present one. We are open to maybe putting one on Third Avenue if that works. I don't know if we need permit for that, but we want to make this most convenient. I appreciate the comments and questions. We want this to be attractive too. I'm trying more and more to make our facilities, our buildings, our spaces attractive to the community. So I certainly hear that, and I want to be very attentive to that.
So there isn't do you have a current layout for how you were planning to do the parking?
We have somebody designing that. I have not seen that
Okay.
as of present, so that we can use this to the best efficiency that we can,
Sure.
that we can get the parking spaces on there without causing the congestion, et cetera, in the parking and onto the street.
Staff, did you have a recommendation on whether or not the traffic should be on 5th Street or on 3rd Avenue?
I talked to our city engineer, Stephen Lang, about how it's currently laid out. And he did not have a problem with them using the current drive for the new parcel. With the cars oriented away from the residences. If they wanted to make greater use of that area, they would obviously have to come up with a different design. But as Father said, they have not come up with a design. If it was substantially different than what we're talking about today, they would have to come back and ask for an amendment to the conditional use permit. If it's fairly similar, there's not a great deal of difference, we could just permit it or allow it when they get there. Did you want to say something, Craig?
Well, there's an alternative. You could say as one of the conditions that the final traffic design be approved by the city engineer. Because one might think that an entrance, if it was far enough away from the main entrance or the main intersection between the street and the avenue there, would not be objectionable. And if that would be okay to you, then it would just be important to make sure the engineer passed on it. So that's an option as opposed to worrying about it coming back.
Wouldn't the city engineer have to approve a new access anyway?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
So, yeah, but I think that's a good point, that we can just make that a condition. My question is on the rear yard setback. Since will be considered a detached garage, then it just has a 5-foot setback from the backyard, back property line.
Correct, and that is, yes, that's correct.
So,
Any other questions from the commissioners? Anything else you wanted to share with us?
No, I thank you for your time and looking at this. So, thank you.
Okay.
thank you.
So we need to take action by approving the conditional use permit, approving it with conditions, or denying the conditional use permit. And this is our action. It's not a recommendation to the city council. Anybody have a motion they'd like to put forward?
I move we approve it with the condition that the city engineer approves the traffic flow and that there be some additional landscaping at the decision of the church, but some additional.
And would you add the other recommendations that were made in the materials?
The 8 conditions.
Well,
It's probably assumed, but it doesn't hurt to put it in the motion.
okay, I was approving this as you had put it to
Okay.
us. Yes.
Just to clarify, thank you.
So the motion is to approve the conditional use permit with the 8 conditions outlined, recommended by staff, as well as that the traffic plan be approved by the city engineer's office. And do you want to give them a percentage of green space?
No,
Rick?
no.
Just,
In fact, you know, if we look at number 2 on the list, I think we don't need to add that.
Okay. So it's the 8 conditions as outlined, as well as the design of the traffic pattern being approved by the city engineer.
Right.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, second by Mino. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so the last item on our agenda is review of extraterritorial jurisdiction, a subdivision regulation. Holly, what do we need to know?
All right. So state statute allows a municipality to apply its zoning, or not zoning regulations. I want to be clear, this is not, the county already has its own zoning regulations. So we're just looking at applying our subdivision ordinance and regulations to an area within 2 miles of our city limits. So out into the county 2 miles, so that we will be able to at least get, I guess, notice of any subdivisions going in that are right next to our city limits, and also have the opportunity to comment or make or to be able to review the subdivision as it's being proposed. We've learned in the past, we've had to do a couple of annexations in properties where we've had water problems typically. We've had issues with properties not having adequate space or soils for on-site treatment. So we've been annexing in areas that have these issues, and then also when they come in, they have these really tiny roads, and they have their houses are in zoning to would still be something we'd have to work with the county on, but you know, the houses may be really close to the roads. We can't expand them. We have just a lot of issues that are very different from city to county and become a problem for us when they're eventually annexed in. And this may not be a big issue for us right now, but for the people maybe 20 years from now who are potentially, you know, dealing with the zone or the subdivision coming into the city and how to make that work with what we currently have. We end up with a lot of sometimes non-conforming properties, you know, which take another 20 years to deal with. So that's kind of the idea, is that we would have some kind of ability to direct or impact some of the subdivisions coming into the area that are very close to the city.
So would we have the same authority as within the city limits, or would it have some limitations?
We would have some limitations because the county's zoning would still apply.
Are we making a resolution to the city council, or?
We are recommending to the council that they adopt or not adopt this ordinance. And what Holly has written here is really pretty strictly defined within the Minnesota statutes. So there's not a lot of room for editing or changing around. We're either going to adopt the authority that the state has said we can, or we're not. Is that right, Holly?
Yes, that's correct. The ordinance is basically just copied out of the state statute, what the state says that we can do. I can't really modify it. It's just, it is what it is. It's what we're allowed to do, or if we choose to do it. Some of our surrounding communities have adopted the same ordinance. I'm not sure how often it comes into play. I did talk to the county planner. They recommended it, again, because they would like the city to have some involvement in the subdivisions that are being created very close to our boundaries. I think they feel that there should be maybe some increased requirements, but maybe politically that's difficult in the county right now. But you know, I can't say for certain, but we certainly do have different requirements. We have, you know, much more, we have wider roads, we have utilities, we have different zoning requirements. And as we move forward, there'll be lots of discussion about how we will cooperate in working on the subdivision regulations along with the county zoning. There are some things like, I'm not sure if you've heard of this before, but ghost platting, or it's like an overlay of what the subdivision would look like if it were built with city requirements with minimum lot size or minimum lot sizes. And so then you know where to kind of put your house so that if it was ever subdivided in the future, it's not going to be in, you know, in the way of whatever the city zoning would require.
As I read this, though, it looks like our zoning ordinances do apply.
This is what we would provide to the council as the proposed ordinance. We don't actually have this in our ordinance right now.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, if we do this, then we actually do have control over the zoning within those subdivisions, if I'm reading this right.
Just the subdivision regulations, not the zoning.
Well, it says,
Maybe I printed that wrong. Oh, are you looking at the statute?
Yeah, whatever it is, 2A, somewhere I've lost it now.
Do we just want the highlighted?
Just the highlighted part. Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
we can also apply our zoning outside of the city limits, but only if there's an absence of it. So because the county has already adopted zoning ordinances,
okay.
we can't take that away. We have to follow their rules.
So the county, at least the present county officials are agreeable to this?
That I do not know. That's not really, they don't
Hasn't been
have
visited
a
with
choice, no.
Could you give us a specific example, Holly, of how this would have affected something that you've tried to do or would have benefited something? I'm having trouble
Well, I think if
understanding
you
why
look
we
at
need to do this.
if you look at the subdivision along 31st Avenue Northwest and all the challenges that they're having now with putting the city sewer in, the city water, if that had been platted out originally with regard to the city's plans, the streets would be sufficient and everything else. So
So had this ordinance been in place, we would have been able to tell the county that, no, you can't subdivide it that way, you have to do it like this and this to be compliant with us?
No,
Should
they
we
can
ever
still,
do
no,
that?
their zoning would still apply with a certain size. They can have a certain size, lot, which seems to be bigger and bigger now. But we would be able to have an alternative plan or require an alternative plan, which is like the ghost planting or the overlay. So we would be able to at least have a plan for future annexation potentially, what it would look like if it was brought into the city.
So it provides you a seat at the table.
It gives us a seat at the table, yes.
But
I
do
mean,
they
at this
have to
point,
follow it?
what's that?
Do they have to follow it?
They would have to follow, well, it depends.
Basically, we're going to say that within 2 miles of the incorporated boundaries, we can tell you how you have to plot the land?
Well, no, because that's a zoning question.
I'm having trouble with this.
Am I explaining this right?
Well, it's my understanding, having looked at the statute in this ordinance, that if this is passed, the state statute allows the municipalities' design standards for platting new subdivisions to apply to land that's technically outside its boundaries as long as it's within 2 miles. So issues that are addressed in the platting process would be governed by Austin rules rather than county rules. So for example, if a new subdivision is being designed within 2 miles of Austin, they would not ordinarily, in the platting process in the rural area, build in future easement areas for public utilities to be laid in the future. But with this in place, we would be allowed to mandate that plat include and designate those easements so that when utilities have to be put in, there are places for them to be put in, and the design of the neighborhood is such that it can be done efficiently. if a subdivision's being created in a rural area, the road is going to be designed at whatever minimum standards the county applies, which is far less stringent than city roads inside of Austin. And whether they're constructed that way at the beginning, at least when it's platted, the right-of-way for the road will be designed at the proper width so that if it needs to be improved in the future because it's being annexed into the city, it's already platted out, it's part of the design of the subdivision, it's in the platting process, so we know where it is, and we know that there's not a house or a garage or something else built where the road needs to be in the future. It's those types of things that yes, our more stringent requirements will apply to those subdivisions that are created in the future within 2 miles of Austin.
And those are called subdivision regulation,
Yes.
not zoning.
Right.
So we don't have the authority to say this is B2 or R1, but we have the authority to say you have to plan for easements for your public
Exactly.
utilities.
The county will still declare that this is a proper place for housing, or this is a proper place for a subdivision, this is a proper place for this many houses to be constructed. But as part of the platting process, if you remember, there's a preliminary plan that, if it's in the city limits of Austin, there's a preliminary plan that comes here. We have all the various agencies in town, the cable company, utilities, phone company, city engineers, staff, planning and zoning, everyone take a look, school district, take a look at everything that's going on and provide comments back. Then that plat is redesigned consistent with those comments. It comes back for a final review. What this would mean is that as part of that process, those higher standards for how those things are designed would have to be built in to that surveyed plat, to that diagram that designates where future roads are going to be. Other areas that might come into play, we require green space and parks and some of those sorts of things in a new neighborhood, or water retention ponds. We may have slightly different requirements than the county, more stringent requirements in that regard. Well, if that neighborhood is going to come into the city, it would be nice to have some green space built into the plat, and it would be nice to have some water retention ponds, if that's necessary from an engineering standpoint, built in. Otherwise, if you build it too dense and then it comes in, we don't have space for that, and you can't figure it out. And now it's much harder to deal with those issues later. So it gives us a seat at the table, but it is, certain parts of it are going to be by our rules, not their rules. The statute allows for it. It's not a turf war necessarily. It's a recognition that while this is your land now, someday in the future it's probably going to be our land as things continue to move outward. And so it's just planning for that and working cooperatively, hopefully, to make sure that what they're doing out there becomes something we can absorb when the time comes.
Yeah, my impression is with working with my counterpart with the county is that they feel like this is something that would be workable for them. The point about easements, that's a good one to make, because I know that our engineers, and maybe Mr. Commissioner Bremner could speak to that too, are out trying to get easements from everybody in these communities where we're doing projects that we've annexed them in to do water and sewer projects. So that does add a lot of time and cost to the project that wouldn't ordinarily, that maybe we could avoid somewhat if we had some kind of structure or some kind of way to address those issues up front rather than 20 years down the road.
Does this ordinance, once it's in effect, in any way affect that property within that two-mile boundary then in the future for proceedings like annexation or development later on? Does it have any effect on that process?
No, the statute and rules related to annexation would still apply. It just means that if a decision is made to annex a certain area and those procedures are followed, the area comes in more usable for the city, or more consistent with what's already in the city. It's the only change. Doesn't make it more likely or easier from a procedure standpoint to do the annexation itself.
Yeah, I agree. There's a completely separate statute that applies to those proceeding.
Any other questions?
No. I think it makes good sense to, get as much influence on that as we can ahead of time, as legally allowed in it, anyway.
I can't remember how we're.
So if we're ready to take action, I need a motion that would recommend to the city council that we adopt or not adopt this ordinance.
Okay, I move that we make a recommendation to the city council to adopt this ordinance.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Bremner. Have a second?
I'll second.
And a second by Commissioner Nelson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And I believe I'm ready for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Brebner, Nelson, again. Okay.
And I have
adjourn.
nothing further?